everybody, welcome back to the Rule Your Mind vodcast. I'm very excited to have a friend and a colleague, Matt Fossey. He's the CEO of Invoke Tax Partners, as well as a founding member of Fundamental Sports Management, a sports agency located in San Antonio. And he brings a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, both from a leadership perspective, but also in this sports world. And, he's also, I think, a pretty good golfer from what I hear, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining me here today.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. So, I'm curious about, you started, a founding member of this sports agency. What got you into that? That's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is. I think the first part of it was just saying yes to a wild idea, and you kind of get to a point. I turned 40 a few years ago, and had been fortunate enough to have lots of experiences that I think gave me a pretty good foundation for learning, for building businesses, helping people, growing practices and things. And I think as you turn 40, whether it's a midlife crisis or a chance to really focus in on what you really want to do with your career, it was a chance to kind of take something that was fun, just take something that you could do with a really good friend, and also fulfill a need that we saw in the marketplace, which is always the key underlying for anything. And so we just decided to go for it and decide to try and turn a passion project into a career. And so far, so good. It's been really fun. We've learned a ton. Been in the room with people that I never thought I'd be in the room with before, which is very exciting. And learned a ton. So it's been fantastic.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I know that you come from a long line of running businesses, bringing a lot of leadership experience, managing teams, managing people. But I also know that you're a pretty good golfer, right? And you played pretty high level in your youth. And I think even to this day, you're still an avid golfer, maybe not right now with what's going on in the world, but you do try to go out and on the links every once in a while. How have you transferred some of the skills that you've learned as an athlete into leadership, both on the corporate world, but as well as, even within this sports agency?
Yeah, I've been involved in sports since I could walk, whether it was soccer, baseball, basketball, golf, really played them all. Never played anything at a D1 level or anything, really beyond high school. I think in golf, I've played some competitive amateur at the state level. And, but I think that experience, taught me three things that I try and do with everything else. And that is, if you're a leader, never ask somebody to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. So, as you're building things, it doesn't really matter what your title is. Sometimes you got to roll up your sleeve and jump right in there and take the garbage out or do data entry or any of those types of things to really create a culture and show that as the leader, you're not just going to tell people to do stuff. You're going to actually do it yourself and set that example. I think the second piece is the importance of the team around you. Focus on finding the right elements and the right people that can work together. Not necessarily people with the backgrounds that on paper suggest that they should be perfect, but the ones whose life experience, the role they play, their attitudes, their work ethic, all those things. Those are the things that really build out the team that I think can be successful. And then thirdly, which sounds like a coach, and sometimes they roll your eyes, but trust the process and do the right thing. And if you do those two things, success is a byproduct of that. So those are really the three biggest things I've always tried to do, that I've learned through sports,
Yeah.
whether it be team sports or whether it be individual sports. And they've so far proven to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The second one, right? The right team around you. I know that, we at FSM, I'm the VP of human performance there. Um, and, we work together on trying to not just help the team members that we have, right? Like the agents, the marketing team, finance, all the different departments, but also working with the athletes, right? But even before we get the athletes, we're trying to sign individuals, and we're not just signing everybody. I think we're assuming everybody has some talent, but once you have a level of talent, how do you try to find the right fit, right? Like, what are some of the things you do to try to find the right characteristics beyond obviously having the skill level to achieve to play at that level, right? In this case, the NBA. But once that's taken care of, what are some of the other things you all are looking for when trying to bring somebody within your team or the family of
Yeah,
FSM?
I think a lot of it's desire. I think a lot of it's work ethic. Um, I think a lot of it is the undying will to be successful, and someone who's unafraid to work at it. Growing up and being around folks who certainly played at a much higher level than I did, and now seeing it from the basketball player's point of view. What you realize for the most part, talent always wins. um, but when you find the person with the talent who wakes up every day believing that they're not very good, and that gives them that desire to
Right.
continue to achieve and get better as if they're not good, whether they really believe that, whether they've tricked their mind, but that undying desire and passion to wake up every morning and not believe what they're reading about themselves. I think
Yeah.
those are the special kids, because those are the ones who are going to work. Those are the ones who aren't going to believe what they read, and they're going to know internally that every day they can wake up and achieve something greater than where they're at or what they are, and they're going to work tirelessly to do it. And that's those are the kind of kids, the work kids, the talent kids are special. But the ones that have the talent and that unwavering ability to believe that every day that they can improve and nothing's going to get in their way of doing that. That's the kid, and I think humility. Folks who do that, but then are still very approachable, who are still very believing in everybody's sort of a human, right? And any better than anybody else. And so I'm going to work at it. I'm going to excel at it. But then when I'm not doing it, I'm just a normal person that's going to hang out and listen and have good conversation and be a sponge towards the things that are around them. So I think that for me is key, is finding that balance of talent and work ethic and hunger, to really achieve.
Yeah, and I know that you and I have worked both on the corporate side, doing some stuff with your teams on that side, and then also obviously within the agency. But so for my world, we talk about growth mindset, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this idea of mindset, which is I think what you're getting at, and it's about how do you manage setbacks? How do you view challenge? How do you actually view effort, right? Not just how much effort we putting in, but how do you value work ethic and actually having to get up and get into the grind and challenge yourself, pushing yourself, and that is that growth mindset, right? And so I know that we've worked on both fronts, working with some of your corporate team members, but also within the agency. And how have you seen individuals develop that growth mindset? I mean, I guess here's a question: do you think that's something that can be developed? And and then what have you done if you think it can be to actually develop that on either side, right, in the corporate world or in the sports world?
Yeah, I think that can be developed for sure. You go back to, let's talk about practice and
Yeah,
the famous words of Allen Iverson, right?
yeah,
Practice.
yeah,
But the reality of it is, um, whether it's a corporate setting or whether it's sports, continuously working hard is great. But if you're working hard continuously at the wrong things, then you don't see progress. And so there's a fine line between saying, "Hey, I work hard, I work hard, I work hard,"
Right.
and really taking a step back and analyzing, well, what am I working hard at?
Mm.
If it's a corporate type of thing, if I'm working hard, 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 but I'm not achieving profitable growth, then all that
Right.
hard work is really not getting you anywhere. But feeling good about your hard work, but it doesn't show up in the P&L per se. If you talk
Right.
about sports, whether it's form or technique or style, whatever it might be, you could be in the driveway or in the gym every day, on the driving range, whatever. But if you're continuously practicing the wrong thing, then you're actually, in some regards, doing more harm than good because you're you're putting into your muscle memory, the wrong thing down the wrong path, as opposed to really being open minded to understanding what the right approach is, and then really practicing that. And most of the time, if you're doing something the wrong way and you need to change to doing it the right way, that level of effort is the mountain that's very difficult to climb. Some are
Yeah.
willing to climb it. The ones that really, really want to get good and get
Yeah.
better will climb it, and others will decide that what I'm doing is good enough, where I am is good enough, and I guess I don't want to do it. So I think that's the parallel between the corporate side and the sports side is really practicing the right things and having an open mind to understanding when you are and continuing to do it, and also
Yeah.
when you're not, and being able to change.
Right. Yeah. One of my guests, one of my friends, he's an Army guy, and he talks about, you know, it's doing the right things, number one, and then doing the right things well. Right. And so it's not just, like you said, going out and practicing. It's about knowing, are you doing the right things first of all, and then can you develop some consistency within doing those right things. And then, from a theoretical perspective, you think about the 10,000 hour rules, and that really comes from Anders Ericsson out of FSU. He's a sports psychology professor, and people just think it is those reps, or it's 10,000 hours, but it's actually, like you're saying, that the 10,000 hours in the right thing. And actually, it's not even 10,000 hours, right? It depends on the area or the field that you're really trying to improve
Yeah,
upon, right? Some are more complex, some are more, I wouldn't say easy, but easier, right, to develop. And, maybe you don't need as much time, or in some cases, maybe you need more time, right? But you see the great ones, as you were saying earlier, about that desire to get up and put in that work and have that humility of, like, yes, I've reached a certain level, but I can continue to grow. You talk about this idea of deliberate practice, right? And that's what Anders Ericsson calls it, right? Is you're focusing on those right things, and you're getting feedback. You're in this feedback loop where you're working and training, but you're constantly tweaking and adjusting what you're doing so you can see that growth. And I know we've seen it within the corporate world and the teams that we've worked with, but also with the players that we've worked with as well. Um,
yeah. To take that
Go ahead.
to one more level, I've always been about efficient work.
Right.
Working smarter, not necessarily working harder. And I think sometimes the biggest hurdle is when you encounter those folks that view work as a like a rite of passage or a badge of some sort.
Right.
Where I work 14 hours, therefore I should have success. And it's like, well, if I can do in 6 hours what you do in 14 and be more successful, then that's how you get that wheel spinning faster,
Right.
because you've paid more attention to how you're doing it, and the results that come with it. So I think for me, that's something that I really, really lean on is efficient work, as opposed to I call it gross work, where you're logging the hours and just because, as opposed to um, finding a way to get more done in less time.
Right. So you mentioned the folks that sometimes that do just value work for work's sake, right? And they have a different, maybe, persona. And that makes me think of team dynamics, right? And
Hmm.
how we interact with people that sometimes have differing views than us. Um, what advice have you seen? And I know, from a sports world, like, golf is an individual sport, but you still were probably on a team at
Yep.
times, right? But then,
Yep.
so you have that concept, but then you also have within a group dynamic. Um, how have you transferred any of the skills or knowledge that you gained from that sports world from a team dynamics perspective, communication, motivation, etc.?
I think it's always important to start with the finish. Getting people around you, uh, people that you know, people you don't know. I think it's very important to let them know where we're trying to go, what we're trying to achieve. In sports, it was maybe easier because it was the conference championship, or it was the district championship, or it was a state champ, whatever it might be. There's always the sort of the easier goals to obtain in sports because they involve trophies. Back when you were young and trophies were fun and important. Um, as you get older, whether it's business or whether it's the sports agency, um, it's always about achieving a growth. What kind of growth? Um, and it all depends on where you're at in the development of a business, or in the development, individually of your skill set. But I think every day, if you sort of approach what you're doing with an idea of how do I grow, and it's cliche, but sometimes you have to fail to grow, and or you have to have a setback to be able to move forward. But I think doing that, as opposed to putting your head in the sand and just pretending that it doesn't exist, is a lot more detrimental to your ability to go forward, regardless whether you're an athlete or whether you're running a business, because then
Right.
you never really fix the core problem. You just ignore it, hope it
Right.
goes away.
Right.
But they never do. They never do.
Right. Yeah. 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 And so you mentioned the mistakes piece and failing, and right, and that we grow with this failure. You know, what's your strategies on how to get through that? I mean, I think you highlighted some of those things of trying to gain some accuracy and not put your head in the sand, and focus on that root cause analysis, so to speak. But how do I mean, obviously we're going through some adversity now, right? We're
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
society, right? And then, I mean, even before that, mistakes and just the general challenges. What's your advice for people, on an individual standpoint, on how to deal with those adversities and those challenges?
I think in some regards there's a nice balance, and I say that knowing that this is something that I personally struggle with. A nice balance
Yeah.
between what's my plan,
Right.
and then how much flexibility do I give myself to execute when every day, every week, every month, what you planned for, isn't really the way that it's going.
Right.
From an analogy perspective, whether it's guardrails on a road, and center is center, and you try and stay within the two guardrails, whatever that might be. Um, whether it's um, whether it's thinking about, and I know Lou Holtz has a lot of sayings, but one that I kind of like is, his acronym for WIN, what's important now.
Yeah.
And I think that every day you certainly can keep sight of what your big goal is for the quarter, for the year, for every 2 to 3 years. But
Yeah.
ultimately, you have to tackle every day, what's important now. And those are really key things. And if you ignore those things, you never get a chance to get to achieving the big goal. And so I think that's what you see sometimes as a challenge out there is you get the folks who are just so big picture oriented, and those are great people to be involved with,
Right.
but you can't pay attention or figure out the daily details or the weekly
Right.
details, and
Right.
it's hard to have a pulse and connecting the achievement towards the big picture if we're not really paying attention to the progress we're making along the way.
Right. Yeah. I love that. What's important now? yeah, Lou Holtz, right? A very, very good coach, and some advice, right, on how to focus every day. Um, but like you said, the bigger picture, and some people have struggled with the details. One of the things that we know with athletes, particularly as athletes progress, right, even in high school, right, or even junior athletes, right, as you start seeing that you have some level of skill, sometimes what can happen is we become entitled, right, and we see that in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of ways, right? And you see, that just gets to another level when they go from high school to college and from college to the pros. How do we, and you mentioned humility earlier. What what can somebody do to not just develop humility, but to try to help them get out of that bigger picture, like, oh wow, look how awesome I am, and try to fight some of that entitlement? Because I know that's something that we think about when we're working with some of the guys that we potentially want to bring in, the people we're recruiting for the agency, is what their level of humility is, their work ethic, all those kinds of things. Do you have any kind of thoughts about that, of how to fight some of that entitlement?
So, honestly, I think the person that's probably the most capable of answering that question is you, the sports psychologist. I mean, I guess I'd turn that back to you. Is how do you deal with that? Because
Yeah,
for your career have come in contact a lot more, with that
yeah,
than I have. And so, I mean,
yeah,
that's a curious question for me to you, even though you asked me the question. But I think
yeah,
our audience probably you would like to hear your answer more than
yeah.
mine because of your background.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine you got some good insights there as well. But yeah, for us, what we really try to do is focus on those values, and you know, it, a lot of the work I do is from a values based perspective, and knowing who you are fundamentally, right, and having an identity, right. And so, what you can see happen sometimes with athletes is they become so engrossed with their own that identity of being this elite athlete that they don't have these other outlets that doesn't. Uh, sometimes when you have these multiple identities, right? Like I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a coach, and I have all these different things. Those different areas can keep me more humble because I've got my eyes across a lot of different spectrums. But really going back to those fundamentals of who am I, what do I care about, what are the things that are most important to me, and then being consistently going back to those things is what's going to help us maintain a level of humility, right? So
Yeah.
if you think about the more reasoning questions that are out in the world, right? Like, is it okay to steal if you have no money, right, to feed your family? And you just wrestling and mentally wrestling with those kinds of concepts help us remind us of our values, which then can help us prevent some of that entitlement feeling, because it brings us back to what matters, right? Not just this glory and this fame or this money. It's, why am I doing this? What is this going to allow me to do, right, for the society and for the world?
Yeah, for me, I coach some of my kids as teams,
Yeah,
basketball primarily,
yeah,
and the one thing that I always like to see, clearly going back to some I said earlier, talent sort of always prevails,
hmm,
but the talented kid who also is the teacher,
right,
to me that's something that I look for, even whether it's third grade or seventh grade or eighth
right,
grade, is the best kid on the team, are they yelling at kids who make mistakes, or are they over there
right,
teaching them and bringing them
yeah,
along, as it relates to improving? And so I don't think that concept stops, whether you're in college, whether you're in the
right,
pros, whether
right,
you achieve executive level or a managerial level in a corporate
right,
setting. You're the leader, and are you the leader that yells at someone and blames somebody, or are you the leader that seeks to learn why something happened and then making sure that you're teaching them, how for it not to happen again, or how to bring them along? And I think what that does is a couple things. It eases some tension. It
right,
creates and provides some confidence,
yeah,
because to a certain extent, it's okay to fail as long as you learn from it. Um, and by having a leader, whether it's an athlete or whether it's an executive, that understands that and doesn't create an environment of fear around that, but yet it creates an environment of growth and learning, I
Right.
think you're going to have a strong unit that, even if it's weak as it's coming together, uh, when it arrives, so to speak, its longevity and its staying power is there. I mean, you could look at any of the sort of what you might call dynasties in any of the sports leagues over the
Right.
years. You probably
Right.
find that as a key fundamental, whether it's the Spurs, whether it's the Yankees, whether it's the Patriots. Pick any one of those, and probably others as well. And you probably had a culture where the best guys were teachers and wanted to make sure that they brought folks along um, in their own way. So I think that's something that stands the test of time for sure, and transcends business and sports.
Yeah, I love that notion, right? So, can you teach? And I think that was kind of what you talked about at the front end, right? Is having the right people, but then leaders being able to do tasks that are maybe not beneath them, but they're part of the team, right? You're not asking someone to do something
Yeah.
that you wouldn't do yourself, and I think that goes whether it's sports or business, being able to do that. And I think if you put in that work ethic, I think that does help with the entitlement. You know, I think there's a new age of athletes. If you think of some of the best in the world, and obviously I don't know these people individually. I don't know if all these things are entirely true, but you see what LeBron James is doing outside of sports. You see what Steph Curry is doing outside of sports. As just two examples where they're bringing other people along. They're helping individuals grow and develop businesses right outside of their sport. And I don't know if that was always happening way back when, but I think people have a more of those self identities, which I think actually can help, as we were talking about earlier, with that entitlement. But they're also teaching people how to be successful in those different domains. So
It's
it's pretty,
great
pretty cool.
point, Robert, because that's a big fundamental reason why we started FSM.
Right.
Rahul and I, back however many years ago, one day we're sitting around and thought, hey, we got to do something here, um, and we just happened to stumble across an article, and I can't remember what player it was. It doesn't really matter, but it was just the thing that you read about of someone who made enough money for 3 generations,
Right.
and was broke, within 5 years of being done playing, and
Right.
and what you realize, and what we realized was, folks care about, I think, these players while they're playing. But
Right.
what responsibility does an agency have, or what responsibility does people around these kids have to ensure that they understand this position that they're in? They understand the privilege that they've achieved by being a fantastically successful athlete, and not so much managing money, because that's not really what we're about, but providing and making sure that we're very realistic about careers. If you're great,
Yeah.
you're going to play for 10 years. But most of those guys don't even come close to that. And so, but they still make, generational money in that short period of time. And so how do we work with them? Not only in the sports sense, because that's important and that's obviously why they're
Right.
hiring us, but how do we provide an environment of continual learning?
Yeah.
Rahul and I are both entrepreneurs. We do other things, besides FSM. We're involved in other things. And the
Right.
platform of teaching these kids who have been basketball players their entire life, talent is talent, and they're all smart.
Right.
But the focus and their upbringing for most of them has just been around what they do on the basketball court. And we're very interested in that, because that's obviously the foundation of our business. But we're also very interested in making sure that when they're done, that
Yeah.
we've helped them with how to make decisions outside of basketball. We've opened up doors, for them to potentially get involved with some of our partners in projects that can really create this incredible foundation for themselves and their families for many, many, many generations to come. Think about Think about some of the bigger names like a David Robinson,
Right.
or a Magic Johnson,
Right.
obviously huge names, but those
Right.
guys made enough money probably playing ball that they didn't really have to do anything. But they're
Right.
now pillars of their industry, pillars of their communities from a business and opportunity sense because somebody paid attention to them and they were sponges because of their intelligence and they learned something that took them far beyond what their basketball days took them beyond. And so that's really important to us. And I think when we talk to families, when we talk to kids,
Right.
that's the one thing that we want to make sure that they understand is hey, you're a great ball player, and no one's going to tell you you're not. Much of what you achieve on the court is because of that, and we're going to help you with your mind. We're going to help you with your ability to have doors open for you, and then it's up to you to take advantage of that. But when you're done, we want to make sure that you understand that the relationship that we have doesn't end when you're done playing. In many ways, it's just beginning. It's beginning at a different level because we're now there to help with other things that that you might want to have or need help with. So that's a big fundamental foundation of FSM, which we're excited about. And so far, that message has been really well received, and I think it's shown in the folks that we've been able to sign in a
Right.
very short period of time as a sort of a startup agency, a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know we within our team meetings, and I think this holds true with our clients, but as well as just our internal team, is we throw out the FSM family, a lot, and
Mhm.
trying
Yeah.
to have that culture of that we're here to each other, support each other, and obviously, yes, there is that fundamental aspect of helping this individual play in the teams that they want to play in, and improve in that area. But then also, like what a family does is they support people not just in one endeavor, in multiple endeavors. But that makes me, thinking of some of the greats, that you mentioned, David Robinson and Magic Johnson, and I talked about LeBron James, and they developed these other skills that have helped them be successful beyond their specific talent. In this case, we all mentioned basketball players, but what are some of those things that people could start, or young athletes could start developing now? What are some other characteristics, attributes that would serve them well as they progress through their sport, that you think would be beneficial? Whether it's communication or in terms of negotiating or critical thinking or those kinds of things, which obviously apply to sports, but also probably applies in many cases to those other areas. Uh, any thoughts about what coaches, parents, even the players themselves could be trying to work on, in terms of like leadership skills, or maybe even entrepreneurial skills or business skills?
Yeah, it's to me it comes back to a single concept, and that is also a word which is curiosity.
Right.
You and I talk a lot about curiosity, being curious, and
Yeah.
um,
Sure.
and and being curious opens your mind to um, really wanting to learn. If
Right.
you're fixed mindset, open, whatever it might be, right? But if you're
Yeah.
curious, your mind is opened, and you're wanting to learn something is there, and so that I think is contagious. I think
Right.
if as a leader you're curious, then you're never going to be someone who just sits there and says, "I'm good, I'm good."
Right.
You're always wanting to take that next step to understand um, what's the impact of this, or man, that guy made a huge transformation from the end of the season to the beginning of the next season. Like, what did he
Right.
do?
Right.
And maybe the physicality of it is unmatched,
Right.
but the work ethic and the process that they went through to make that transformation, processes are something that anybody can follow. Your
Yeah.
physical attributes obviously limit some things, but the process is important. And so if you're curious about what steps those folks take or took,
Yeah.
is that something that using golf as an example, right? I mean, if
Right.
anybody on this watches and pays attention, Bryson DeChambeau, the Dallas kid who went from 195 pounds to 225 pounds over the season, just being in the gym like a football player. Um, and he's gained tremendous amount of yards and off the tee, and he's still a pretty good putter, and he has decent. I think he won a few weeks ago finally. So you can look at that and be like, wow, what did he do?
Right.
And you can know what he did because he just spent 4 or 5 hours a day in the gym.
Right.
But then it's like, okay, does that work for me? Do I want to do it that way? But if you don't
Right.
care, then your mind of growth probably is somewhat limited because you're not really interested in what others did to be better. Um, and you're not interested
Yeah.
and curious how that might be applicable to the goal that you have individually or that you have for your company about how to be better. Um, I think in leadership, it really is the difference between, um, I think you and I've talked about this a little bit, being sort of like an inline leader from a
Right.
militaristic point of view, to a strategic leader where
Right.
you're constantly thinking about the next step, as you get comfortable with the ability for a team or an individual to execute the current step.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the fundamentals of that fix and growth mindset, there's where it matters is in certain areas, right? Like how you deal with failure and setbacks and things we've talked about already. But one of the ones is success of others, how you interpret the success of others, right? And so if you have that fixed mindset, some of the thoughts could be things like, I can't do what they did, or they got lucky, or they have this thing that I don't have. But from a growth mindset set perspective, you're viewing that as with that curiosity, like what did they do? What can I replicate? Oh, I don't have that, but this is a close approximation, and I can do this. Right? These are the specific behaviors I can take that are going to help push me forward. Right? And yes, you're
Yeah.
right. There are certain aspects of performance and particularly in sports that are genetic, right? Like you can't change your height, right? You can't change, yeah, we can improve speed to a certain extent, but some of that is genetic, right? And but that necessarily shouldn't stop us. From a basketball perspective, my heroes, I'm 5'6" myself. So my heroes are guys, Muggsy Bogues and, Spud Webb, that didn't have all the genetic gifts as their counterparts, but still
Right.
were able to do something, right? I mean, they had genetic gifts in different ways, right? Uh, spatial abilities, ball handling, etc. But some of those things they worked at, and they really figured out how to make it work for themselves, and not just view it like, oh, I'm not tall enough, so I'm not going to even try, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that's key to, as you said, not just in sports, but in the professional world or corporate world as well. Um, I know that when we talk about this family culture, right, and like you think about parenting and leadership, I view parenting as leadership, right? And so,
Mhm.
any tips you can give to parents, like if they have a kid that wants to make it to that next level and has some of these genetic skills, what do you think they could do to set them up for success? So like if they are going into like meetings with agents and or agencies, and what should they be looking for, and how are they evaluating an organization, uh, and vice versa? What are some things that they can do to present themselves as effectively as possible?
I think at an early age, it's really good to teach kids how to fail.
Right.
I know that sounds cliche or very backwards, but I think that that gives some humility, that gives
Right.
some hard work, that gives some, hey, you like this feeling? No, okay, well then let's work, doing the right things to avoid this feeling going forward. There's
Right.
different catalysts and different motivations, and I think that grounds people. I think that humbles them because
Mhm.
ultimately, when you're working with a front office, when you're working with, whether you're being recruited, it's very important that you really come across as someone who's coachable, regardless of how much skill you have, someone who has a desire to improve, someone who has a desire to, lift up the team or a person who's potentially made a mistake. If you're a role player, someone who's very content in accepting that role and being the best at it, and
Right.
potentially working yourself out of it. But having a very realistic view of where you are, um, versus where you want to go is really
Yeah.
very important. And that's true of business, as well as it is with sports, because if you think you're better than you are, then you're not going to put the effort in to get better. You're
Right.
not going to take the constructive criticism you get with the right frame of mind, because you're just going to believe everybody's wrong and out to get you,
Right.
and not really taking it for what it is, and that is how do you get better, and how do you become an integral part of the team. I mean, my son is 13 here in a couple of weeks, and
Yeah.
in fact, he turned 13 last week. I've lost track of time. It feels like every day the same. But
Down with
but
you.
he turned 13 last week. But
Yeah.
but even with him, it's hey, when you're disappointed about what happened in the game, if you're disappointed about what happened in practice, have you gone to the coach and asked them, hey, coach, like, this is what I want to be, for you
Right.
and for this team. What are the
Yeah.
things that I need to do, from your mindset to get better so that I can be that. And I don't
Right.
think that there's any coach out there, and just like there's not any business out there, if you have the right person leading it, who's going to look at that ask and say, "Huh, that's a weakness." They're going to look at that
Right.
ask as a strength, and as a challenge, and, well, let's see what this kid can do, because he clearly wants it, um, and let's see what decisions he's willing to make and what sacrifices he's willing to make, or she's willing to make, to achieve it. And that, not only does that buy you more time, but it
Right.
also is the type of person that you want. And anything that's successful is someone who's always looking to achieve, as
Right.
opposed to someone who's just content with what they've achieved.
Yeah. And I think you're what I'm hearing is from a parenting perspective, or even from a coach's perspective. So if I have parents or coaches out there and they're working with their kids and their players, is to create an environment where it's okay to fail and okay to ask for help and say, hey, I want to work on this, or ask those kinds of curiosity questions. Because sometimes inadvertently, as parents or even as coaches, we can shut people down, right? Or sometimes,
Mhm.
depending on your coaching style or your parenting style, you might shut them down on purpose because you think that is a weakness, right? So
Yeah.
for coaches and parents to be open minded, and how do you create that environment where it's not about, you know, and I think people, when I say this, and when I'm working with leaders, regardless of the field, right, whether it's sports or business or even the military, is people sometimes view that statement as you got to be soft. It's not about being soft. It's about
Mm-mm.
creating an environment where somebody can make mistakes, where somebody can raise their hands and say, "Hey, I need some help." But we still have a standard, right? We still have a
Yeah.
certain level we're trying to achieve, and that this help is meant to either help get somebody to standard or above that standard. But if somebody doesn't know how to get there, as leaders or coaches or parents, our job is to try to support that without making it too easy for them, right? Or making it like moving all the obstacles out of the way. It's about learning to deal with those obstacles and still achieve that goal. And I think that's
Yep.
a important piece for folks listening, is that's what sports agencies are looking for. That's what organizations, professional organizations, high performing teams, regardless of the field, right? Is, I mean, when you're looking for somebody, you want somebody that's coachable when you're interviewing. So I think those are kind of the skills that I think would be advantageous for young people to develop: communication, how do you articulate what you've done to the people that you're working with, right? So that they can understand, this is how I've gotten here, this is what I've done, this is how I've dealt with setbacks and failures. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's how do they respond, to not winning. If you look at, going back to golf for a second, one of the
Right.
most historically great winners of all time was Jack Nicklaus. That's
Right.
probably not that big of a surprise for people who pay
Right.
attention to golf, but he was also probably, and I don't have the exact stat, but he was right up there with someone who finished second the most as well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and he was known as being just as gracious in defeat,
Right.
because the understanding of what that person has achieved and how great that is because of how many times he probably cheated himself.
Right.
But being gracious when you've finished runner up, um, and then using that as motivation to go get better, and when no one's watching.
Yeah.
I think that's really that's really a big part of it, because what happens then is that you turn into this sort of like, wow, they came out of nowhere kind of mentality, but they really didn't. They came out of a whole bunch of hard work when nobody was looking and nobody was watching and when nobody cared. So it makes it
Right.
look like they came out of nowhere, but they took some setback, they took some defeat that was maybe very public or very maybe noticeable, and they just sort of disappeared for a while, and really, when nobody cared and nobody was watching, had that inner fire and desire to improve, to get better, to attain. Um, and then they came back very confident and very
Right.
driven to achieve, and then to where it looks like, oh, where'd they come from? Yeah, when nobody comes from, hardly anybody that achieves comes from nowhere. They've come from a place that
Yeah.
they've
I mean,
made it.
yeah. Yeah. I watched The Last Dance, and one of the things that stood out to me was Michael Jordan leveraging, those setbacks or failures or slights, right, or perceived slights. And at a certain point, he didn't have a lot of those failures, but he did have people kind of making statements, and he would leverage that to drive his training, right? And so he had to
Yeah,
find other ways to get himself going and work hard. And you're right. I don't think people gave him enough credit for the amount of work he put in. And if not just from that documentary, but if you, um, you know, interviews from the past of that guy worked hard, right? He put in the work.
yeah,
He wasn't just
yeah,
magically great. I
yeah,
mean, obviously, again, he had some genetic skills and gifts that he was born with, but he also worked really hard to develop a lot of what
yeah,
what made him great. And
yeah,
so yeah, I think if we can instill that work ethic, and then being able to help individuals find ways to motivate themselves and understand and learn from those failures, I think is important. I know that we're kind of coming up on time. I know that you've got some other stuff
sure.
going on. Any last thoughts, that advice that you want to give to, again, coaches, parents, any leaders that we got watching, or athletes themselves, on that you can think help them be more successful, maybe even as it relates to dealing with this downtime that we have going on, and maybe they're not able to do all the things that they normally are able to do. What are some of the other areas they could focus in on while they got some of this downtime?
Yeah, I think the biggest is not being afraid to innovate, not being afraid to make the change that you probably in the back of your mind have been thinking you have to make at some point in time. Well, now you have, I would say, the freedom to do it, and for me, this period of time has been certainly scary and certainly uncomfortable, like it is for everybody else. But from a business sense, it's been very liberating. In the reason is that it's created an opportunity and a freedom to just do it. And I kind of look at it like this. When if I play a very 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 difficult golf course
Right.
versus one that's wide open, chances are I'm going to play better on the very very difficult one, because it forces you to play one shot.
Right.
um, you know wherever you are, there's usually one shot you have to play to be successful. There's not a lot of
Mhm.
thinking. there's just a lot of focusing because you either can play that shot or you can't.
Right.
And I think in crisis, and in where we're at, it's very similar. In many cases, there's a shot to play, or a
Right.
move to make, and it's not a pleasant move necessarily. It might be a move that you've recognized and you've needed to make for some time, but you're either able to play that move or make that move, um, or you're not.
Yeah.
I think, in that sense, there's going to be a lot of innovation that comes from this, a lot of patience, a lot of um, ability to do things differently and maybe non-traditionally. Um,
Right.
and that ultimately, even though things right now are far from good, far, far, far from good,
Right.
I think what comes out of this will be something very interesting, something very special, and I think something that really pivots and redirects, the way a
Right.
lot of things are done, and it won't all be bad. I know we hear about and think about how bad it is, but it won't all be bad, and I think it will set forth a lot of things that will carry forward into the next sort of generation of how we all get things done. So, stay patient, stay curious, um, be very honest with yourself, be very honest with the situation,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to make the decision or to commit to the work that deep down you have to do to get to the level that you're wanting to obtain. And I think
Yeah.
as long as you're honest with yourself, then and willing to put in the effort to get there, I think you'll do just fine. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and where can people, if they want to know what you've got going on? I know you got, like you said, a few, um, projects you're working on, and you do a lot of things. If somebody wanted to keep up with what you've got going on, where could they find you?
Um, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm on there a little bit with some things going on. I think when we jumped into FSM, they forced me to get an Instagram page. So I've got some of the stuff tagged on Instagram.
Yeah.
Invoke's website has some things that's going on, and so all of my content information is on those things as well. So yeah, any
Awesome.
one of those places, it would be it's the best way to get a hold of me. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your insight. I think this will be very valuable to individuals, right? I think some of the highlights I have here are start, with the finish, right? Being curious, being coachable, all those things I think is great advice for our folks listening. So thanks again. Have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch. Thanks everybody out there
Okay.
for checking.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. You have a good weekend as well. All right, bye.